Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Appreciate you joining me for the our almost weekly update of activities in Washington, and it's been an extraordinarily busy last couple of weeks. I wanted to hit three topics at the front end, and then be happy to take your questions on those topics or anything else that's on your mind. First, the topic which I am constantly asked and harassed on in the hallways, what is the status of the bipartisan infrastructure plans? I feel very good about where these bipartisan negotiations have landed. Let me step back and kind of bring everybody kind of up to the state of play. We know that the president and Senator Capito and certain other Republican leading senators had a discussion, went back and forth, went on for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, the numbers that were being thrown around, roughly $300 billion in new spending over a 5-year period, in my mind, did not meet the need or the historic moment in time where the United States can, frankly, get back in the game on infrastructure spending. I think most of us know the independent organizations looking at our airports, our water systems, our broadband, our highway systems, our grid, give America, on almost all of these categories, a failing grade. Matter of fact, we've seen a decline in spending as a percent of our GDP, almost cut back by 40% over the last couple of decades. Infrastructure, which used to be an American competitive advantage versus the rest of the world, has become a competitive disadvantage. As people sit for hours in gridlock, we fly into airports that look more like third world than kind of modern conveyances. We have a rail system that, with the exceptions of the Northeast Corridor, is second rate at best. In too many of our communities, we're relying on water systems that in many cases are close to 100 years old. In my city of Alexandria, we've got multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of in arrears on combined water and sewage. So once the bipartisan presidentially direct with the Republicans broke down, the group of 10 of us who had earned, I think, both trust and respect of each other, having been successful with putting together a $908 billion package back in December, we met. There had been some preliminary conversations. Frankly, there was still a proposal that was less than $500 billion in new funding. That was not going to be acceptable to me or some of my other Democratic colleagues. But I am happy to report that after a tough negotiating session, we have come to an agreement on a top-line number, $579 billion of new spending over a 5-year period. This would be, on any relative comparison basis, a record investment in infrastructure. For example, let me give you a couple of the categories. $110 billion plus in additional funding for traditional roads, bridges, and kind of classic surface transportation funding. It would include, for a state like Virginia, where we see communities like Norfolk under the regular threat of flooding, $47 billion for resiliency, something that's important for Virginia's coastal regions, important for states all around the seaboards, east, west, the Gulf Coast. It would include, record new investments in upgrading our grid technology around energy production, $33 billion in smart grid improvements, making our system more efficient and starting to take on some of the challenges around climate change. Another $40 billion in this package would be towards other power generation sources to move our power generation towards cleaner energy. A personal part of the package that I've been advocating for literally for 10 years with my friend Roy Blunt would be a $20 billion infrastructure bank or infrastructure financing authority. We're the only industrial country in the world that doesn't have this tool, but this kind of infrastructure financing authority could help finance roads, it could help finance ferries, it could help finance expansion of the grid, it could help finance green energy. This kind of tool in terms of leveraging private capital with a federal backstop is smart policy, particularly smart policy when we've got interest rates so low. Literally every category in this close to $580 billion package were categories that President Biden had outlined in his proposal a number of months ago, both in terms of the American Family Rescue Plan and the American Family Plan. We don't include every proposal that the president's outlined. I do believe there will be a need for another bill where candidly we probably won't have as much Republican support, but my Republican colleagues have already said they could see, well in excess of 10 Republican senators, more like 15 to 20, that would be supportive of this infrastructure record investment. On the pay-for components, it's a little more challenging. We've got the Republican constraint that says we're not going to increase taxes. We've got the president's requirement that even things like user fees, such as indexing the gas tax to inflation, something I would be strongly in support of. He doesn't want to include that because it might hit people that make less than $400,000 a year. So we are looking on pay-fors for items such as funds that have been returned to the federal government that were not used for unemployment. There may be certain other CARES funds, and an area that I think has an enormous amount of potential, which is if we put additional funding into the IRS, can we make up some of the owed taxes that are simply not collected? We've got, I think, 4 former Treasury secretaries that have said that dollar amount could be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. The current IRS commissioner says there may be $1 trillion of unpaid taxes. Now, I think we're going to use only numbers that we can get a solid financial backing behind. But I absolutely believe with additional investment in the IRS, we can have a more efficient and effective enforcement mechanism that will generate additional capital. So I'm very hopeful in terms of where the process of the bipartisan infrastructure plan is coming. I'm looking forward to hopefully having those folks who are the masters of conventional wisdom, who think bipartisanship cannot win out the day. I think we will be successful, but let me be clear, the infrastructure bipartisan plan is only step one. There are a number of other agenda items, both around making our tax code fairer, particularly in terms of taking America out of the location of being the lowest corporate taxed nation in the industrial world. We're 35th out of 35 OECD nations in terms of taxes generated by our business community. That's not fair. To move to a fairer system around taxes and recognizing there are certain things the president has proposed, particularly around climate change, that I believe as well need to be included. That second part of the process will be what will be called reconciliation, and that process will go along coincident with the bipartisan infrastructure plan. 2 other quick items, and I know I don't want to go on too long, but so we can get to questions, is trying to urge you to recognize that what happened last week when we got 68 votes for a bill to set up American research and development against China, or counter to the threat posed by the Communist Party of China, this was hugely important. A a lot of dollars that were going into the National Science Foundation, a lot of dollars going into creating research and manufacturing hubs around the country. I hope Virginia would be the recipient of one of those hubs. But specifically, the two items that I focused on the most, and I say this from my position as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, I see China execute in a remarkably efficient way as China picks individual technology sectors where they hope to dominate. Two areas where we've seen this growth. One is semiconductors. Semiconductors are the chips that go inside any kind of our electronic devices, everything from your cell phone to your television to your automobile to your F-35 airplane are loaded with semiconductors. We've even seen a shortage of semiconductors now make auto factories sit idle, not because there aren't Americans that don't want to buy American cars, but you can't make those cars without semiconductors. And the supply chain for those semiconductors has moved from the United States, unfortunately, to Asia. Taiwan, in many ways, is the king of semiconductors at this point. China itself has launched a multi-hundred-billion-dollar program and are building these new fabrication facilities at a record rate. We need, for our economy and for our national security, to bring back that expertise to the United States. In the bill against China last week, we committed, and this was again bipartisan, with my friend John Cornyn, we committed $52 billion of investment in research around semiconductors, and there are additional incentives to build 7 to 10 new manufacturing facilities. They're called fabs, semiconductor fab facilities here in the United States. Horribly important in terms of the jobs, supply chain, and making sure we maintain, particularly on the most cutting edge of semiconductors, that technology lead. What didn't get as much attention was an additional $2 billion in that bill that goes at the issue of 5G and next generation wireless technology. I've talked to many of you over the years pointing out the enormous challenges that we face with Huawei, the Chinese telecom company that puts out cheap equipment, but equipment that also has the ability to spy on American and other users of their systems. We need a Western alternative. We are in this bill that we passed last week with 68 votes, putting in record amounts of investment in 5G and what goes beyond 5G, called Open Radio Access Network, ORAN type technology, to make sure that we can, in a sense, it's almost the equivalent of moving to the cloud, moving to a software-based system rather than a stacked hardware system, will allow us in America and with our allies to put forward a competitive wireless technology system that will beat Huawei, do it at a more efficient and effective price, and do it in a way that will protect our personal information and data. Last comment, I know we've not raised cyber specifically. I'll be happy to take questions on that subject. We know the president is meeting with President Putin today. What I'm looking forward out of this meeting is a couple things. One, I'm obviously looking forward to an American president standing toe-to-toe with Putin and, in a sense, saying he is speaking not only for America, but for NATO and the democracies around the world, and that will push back on the type of abusive behavior in terms of Russia's bad actions. What do I mean by that? I mean saying, we will not abide Russia further interference in the internal affairs of Ukraine, where Russian and Russian agents have already created a quasi-civil war. We need to stand up as well for basic human rights in Russia, whether it be the poisoning of Putin's enemies outside the country or the arrest of opposition figures like Navalny inside Russia. America needs to stand up for human rights in Russia, both in the country and in adjacent countries. And also, the president needs to stand firm on this issue of cybersecurity. We have seen Russia, both through Russian spy agencies, perform major hacks into American companies. There was something called the SolarWinds hack at the end of last year, where Russian agents broke into 18,000 American-based companies, all up and down our supply chain. Luckily, that incursion only resulted in stealing information, classic espionage, but nothing would have prevented the Russians from turning that attack into a denial of service attack where they could have shut down those companies. That would have been an economic catastrophe. We need to say those kind of actions are off limits. We've seen more recently specific cyber attacks like the attack against the Colonial Pipeline, which shut down many of our gas stations in Virginia, such as the shutdown of some of our meat processing facilities, such as the shutdown of ferry systems and other systems around our country, often by cyber criminals based out of Russia. They may not be Russian spies, but they are performing these actions with the acquiescence of the Russian government. We need to draw a bright line. To do that, we need to pass legislation in this country where we have mandatory reporting to our government on these kind of incidents, and we need to work with our allies in making sure that there are international standards so that these kind of activities, Russian-based, Chinese-based, Iranian-based, there is a promise that we will punch back with this kind of interruption, both of our economy, or in certain cases, as in the case of shutting down the Irish healthcare system, where we're literally potentially costing people's lives. So with that is a little bit too long an opening. I'm happy to go ahead, Val, and take some of the questions.
Okay, the first question today comes from Mitchell Miller at WTOP.
Hi, good morning, Senator. Going back to infrastructure, as you know, progressives are getting louder about their concerns that the bipartisan plan doesn't go far enough. Do you think effectively the center can hold on this infrastructure plan to get it to move forward?
Mitchell, there is nothing in this almost $580 billion of new money that I think any Democratic senator would not be in favor of. These are all categories that President Biden's advocated for. These are all movements towards a cleaner energy generated economy. These are all movements towards, making sure every home's got broadband, making sure that we repair our roads and bridges and water systems. Now, it may not go as far as some of my progressive friends would like, but the idea that they would, shut down this record investment, doesn't make a lot of rational sense. Do they want more? Absolutely. Do I want more? Absolutely. But what the White House has agreed is if we can get close to $600 billion in a bipartisan, widely agreed upon law that will help Americans as they go to work and go to school and learn at home, that takes $600 billion basically out of the needs of what will also be a major package around reconciliation. We ought to be able to do both. Let's get this plan passed, recognizing on the reconciliation plan that it'll be very hard to get Republicans. But I think it's a little more than a little crazy when Democrats, whether they are on the more conservative side or on the more progressive side, start shooting each other rhetorically in the press, because end of the day, we have no margin of error. End of the day, if there's a reconciliation plan, which I will be part of, and I'm on the budget committee, it's going to require all 50 senators. So somehow some of my progressive friends trashing the work of this bipartisan group, that doesn't help us get to a all 50-person Democratic reconciliation plan. I'm all in on reconciliation. It may not be as aggressive as what Senator Sanders wants. I think there has to be some fiscal responsibility in that path. But I think we're going to get there. And the one thing that would happen, the one thing I could guarantee is if some of the progressives tried to take down the bipartisan plan, there would be no reconciliation plan because some of those advocates around the bipartisan plan for infrastructure would then not end up being supportive of the reconciliation plan. I'm trying to walk and chew gum and try to keep both these folks who I think have a lot of common goals, keep both these pathways moving in a simultaneous manner.
The next question comes from Allison at the Daily Progress.
Hi, Senator Warner. We have had issues with USPS in the Charlottesville area for a number of years now, and recently in Albemarle County, there have been a couple larger areas that have not received mail for weeks at a time, and people have been missing items they should have gotten a long time ago. USPS won't comment much, but carriers have told residents that there is a carrier shortage here. And I know you and Senator Kane sent a letter earlier this year to the Postmaster General about a lot of these widespread issues. And I was wondering if you all have heard back and heard your questions answered, and also what else are you all doing to address some of these continuing issues with USPS?
Well, Allison, great question. And let me assure you and the viewers, this is happening to all of us. I had somebody on, I think the Christmas card was postmarked about December 10th, sending me Christmas card greetings. I got it February 22nd, I believe, 3 months late. There are longer-term structural problems with the Postal Service. We are sending a lot less mail. FedEx, UPS on packages has become a valid competitor. But that still begs the question, why was this political appointee, Mr. DeJoy, who's got a series of ethical issues raised about even his fundraising techniques, put into this position, dramatically cutting back service in the midst of an election season that raised, I think, a host of problems that are still playing out. The Postal Service came under a lot of scrutiny. We lost a lot of good postal workers who decided to retire. We have put in place, and there's no way people can say, well, why didn't Biden just fire this Postmaster General? The president doesn't have that ability. The president does have the ability, and we are in the process of approving new members of the Postal Service Board, the board that oversees the Postmaster General. And it's my hope is that if we don't see improvements in service, that this new postal board will make a judgment that maybe we need a new Postmaster General. Post office has got challenges, but these challenges seem to have only been exacerbated by what seems to be at best a very erratic business model put forward by Mr. DeJoy, frankly, that has lost a lot of people's confidence because it seemed that a lot of his actions, especially last fall, were geared at trying to slow down people's ability to vote by mail. Again, one more component part of what is becoming more and more evident every day of a pattern that started in the White House, was being carried out by minions of Donald Trump at every level, where there was an attempt to, quite honestly, overturn the results of the election. And again, I keep thinking it couldn't get crazier, but there's not a day that goes by where we don't read of new actions. And unfortunately, one of the spinoffs of part of that scheme was slower delivery of mail. And unfortunately, it's not just in Albemarle County, it's all over Virginia and all over the country.
The next question comes from Amy Knowles at the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. I know that the child tax credit is right around the corner. So at what point in July can Virginia families expect to start receiving those monthly payments? And how do you foresee that this money could impact the average Virginia family?
Well, great question, Amy. One of the things that was the potentially biggest structural change that came out of President Biden's American Rescue Plan in March was a child tax credit that for families who've got kids 6 and under, family would receive $3,600 a year for each child. For folks between 6 and 18, you get $3,000. They would come in a series of monthly payments, and Amy, as you indicated, they would start in July. It has been estimated that this child tax credit would decrease childhood poverty in America by 50%. Now, it's pretty expensive, but if you can have these families be able to put healthy food on the table for their kids, be able to get their kids into child care where they, with the additional tax credit, could pay for child care, and in a country as wealthy as ours, be able to lower childhood poverty by 50%. I mean, I say as a business guy, I can think of very few things that would be a better economic benefit. A kid goes to school that's well fed, well nourished, they're going to learn better, they're going to be a more productive student, more productive citizen. The child tax credit in the Biden plan only lasted through the end of this calendar year. So what we've got to look at, is there a way to continue that? That, unfortunately, is not a program our Republican friends want to support. But as we look at a reconciliation package, this next package after infrastructure, trying to make sure that we give this kind of support for America's kids is something that I'd like to fight for. Now, again, how you weigh that in comparison with some of the proposal by the president on the caring economy, helping those who work in our child care centers or those who work in our senior centers and nursing homes who take care of our parents. You know, I think there's an intersection between that tax credit and at least around child care workers that we're trying to work through. But the child tax credit, I think, is going to be a big shot in the arm to a whole lot of Virginia families. And you're right, Amy, I'm not sure the day in July, but folks will start getting checks in July.
The next question comes from Michael Martz at the Richmond Times-Dispatch.
Good morning, Senator. I'm interested in going back to the infrastructure bill. You talked about the top line number of about $580 million in new spending.
That, Michael, that's $1 billion, not million. It's $579 billion of new money. This is a major infrastructure investment.
Yeah, $1 billion. Excuse me, but you talked about the total number of maybe going up to $1 trillion. Is that right? And what would be the additional spending? And my real question is there a way to repurpose some money that's coming in through ARPA, through the Rescue Plan Act? For example, Virginia has a need to try to modernize schools. ARPA's money is limited to being able to repair schools, HVAC systems, roofs, things like that, but not replace them. Is there a way that in this package you can free up some of that money to be used to build new schools?
Michael, well, first of all, one of the things, and I won't go on at length on this because Rachel will cut me off, but the early discussions I found really frustrating because people were talking about 5 years versus 8 years versus baseline. And when I got involved in these discussions, I said, no, let's talk apples to apples. So we were talking about new spending over a 5-year period. The 579 is the new dollars. What we then say is let's add back in the baseline. The baseline is what we would be spending on roads or resilience or on broadband if we did nothing. That number over 5 years is roughly $394 billion. So you add the 579 plus the 394, that gets you in that 970 range that sometimes appeared in the press. The president wanted more. The president wanted literally $1 trillion of new spending over 5. We got him about 60% of what his request was. But I think if you again take a moment and take a breath and step back and look at this on any comparison basis, both in terms of actual dollar increase and even percentage increase, this really meets that criteria of a once-in-a-generation investment, number one. Number two, on the question of repurposing, there will be some of the dollars repurposed. There's been already agreement that those states that chose to not pay the additional $300 plus up for unemployment, and it may not be a large number, but it looks roughly in the $25 billion category. Those funds can be reused for another purpose. I know specifically, there's nobody that's been a bigger advocate than I have been for broadband. Some of the monies that have gone to state governments and local governments, that's already been given flexibility to invest in broadband. I'd like to take, say roughly $20 billion of that state and local money and say, let's put that formally into the broadband category. We'd put in some additional money as well, but again, with the goal here to make sure, and this is where I'm working with the governor, I want to make sure all 133 jurisdictions in Virginia have a fully fleshed out broadband plan in place by the end of the year. That doesn't mean everybody's going to have fiber to their home by the end of the year, but it should mean that any Virginia home can say, all right, I know it's coming, I know when it's coming, I know it's going to come at a high enough speed that I can actually do that Zoom at home and still have my kid do homework at home. That kind of repurposing of some of those dollars is another example. On the school construction, it's more of a jump ball. New school construction has not been traditionally a federal government responsibility. It has been more state and local governments. So I think there's still some debate on that. But the overall question of repurposing some of the CARES dollars and subsequent COVID dollars is something the administration's agreed to.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and that comes from Tom Fitzgerald at WTTG.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for doing the call, Senator. Question on unemployment. We talked about this previously. Governor Northam told us this week that he is not interested in prematurely sunsetting the extra $300 pandemic unemployment benefit like 25 other states have done so far. Instead, what Virginia is going to do is move towards a matching program of incentives up to $500 for businesses that the state would match, and people have to have under 100 employees and pay at least $15 an hour in minimum wage. My question to you is, we spoke to some restaurant owners in Arlington this week who have been struggling. One guy said he had a help wanted sign out for 2.5 months. And one of them raised the point that he felt that despite the fact that he felt this was done with the best of intentions during the pandemic and during the hardship that people are facing, that the federal government did have a hand in the hiring troubles they're having right now. So my question to you is, given what Governor Northam talked about this week, would Congress at all be in a position to consider a federal version of that through either use of unused pandemic funds or some other means to jumpstart hiring, which we're hearing from so many places right now is a real issue, as these businesses have had their restrictions lifted, but they can't fully staff up because the workers aren't there?
Well, Tom, we're talking about a benefit that we're now down to, I think it's like 9 weeks or 10 weeks left. I mean, this is a benefit that will go away by the end of the first week of September, number one. Number two, I think you are seeing almost every state take some kind of action. Some states are basically getting rid of the benefit. Other states are saying, well, why don't we give you additional plus up if you get hired? I think we don't really have good data yet. I'm sure there are certain people that are choosing not to go back to work because they've got the plus up. I also think there are a number of people that aren't going back to work because they still don't know if they can get child care, because the child care systems have not been reopened, and if you still have some social distancing requirement, you're not going to be able to have as many kids in the child care center. The third thing I think and I think we've not really looked at this, is that, I think a lot of folks, after this challenging year of COVID, have taken this as a time to kind of maybe sit back and reassess what they want to do with their lives. And there's awful lot of folks that love being in the restaurant business, but it is a hard business. And in a state like Virginia, where even with we're in the process of raising minimum wage. If you're a dishwasher, I think we're up to $9.50 an hour. And you're working 40 hours a week, not putting enough money to feed your family on the table, I think there are people that are generally thinking, is that really the kind of job I want to go back to? Maybe they want to think about some other kind of work. And I think we're having this kind of reassessment about what work is going to look like on the other side of the pandemic. Final thing, Tom, and this is again, kind of classic nerdy Warner stuff, but one of the things that we need to put in this next package is that no one that I'm aware of was saying, well, let's just go ahead and plus up this money on unemployment regardless of the economic circumstances. We were guessing how long the COVID virus would take place. We tried to go to the then Trump Labor Department and say, hey guys, why don't we plus this up, but then as the economy gets better, we'll cut back the benefit. Labor Secretary Scalia, the son of the Supreme Court judge, about as conservative as you could get, said to us, guys, I'm really sorry, we can't do that because our computers are so old that they can't be flexible enough to dial down the amount of unemployment benefit that goes out based upon economic circumstances. That's crazy. We saw the same thing a little bit with the VEC. Huge amounts of concerns in the VEC. Part of that was because we've not upgraded our IT systems. It's people get frustrated with government appropriately. You got a company like Amazon that can change the price you get on an item based upon the minute of the day which you purchase it. I'm not saying we're going to get as good IT systems as Amazon, but we sure as heck ought to upgrade our systems so that when we have a circumstance like this and we make a policy decision that says, oh my gosh, when everybody's unemployed, we're going to give you a little bit more money because you can't find a job, but as jobs come back, we're going to dial down the incentive. We ought to make those investments in those IT systems so that we never have to go through this kind of craziness again. And you got my commitment to do that. It's the same kind of thing we're talking about around the tax gap issue on the IRS. When we as a federal government or a state government don't make the kind of infrastructure, and I would argue this is classic infrastructure investments in the IT systems so that we can actually bring the kind of flexibility in government services that Americans have come to expect when they deal with the Amazons of the world, then we frankly short shrift a lot of folks and we make the government look even wackier than it should look. And that's a technical term there at the end.
Okay, that's all the time we have for questions today.
Thank you, guys. Be safe, everybody.